The stuffed bear dropped from her small hand as she staggered backwards. Her small, bare feet stumbled on the cold concrete as she attempted to escape the approaching monster. Her mind was blank, fear and panic overtaking any other thoughts. She held out a trembling hand, hoping beyond hope. "Please," she begged, but her pleas went unheard. Her outstretched fingers unceremoniously cut from her hand. She screamed in anguish, pushing her small body flat against the wall behind her. Desperate, she tried again. "Please, I don't know what I did wrong." Before she could finish, she watched as one of the monster's clawed hands came streaking towards her face. There was blinding pain, and then everything went black. The first thing they noticed was the suffocating pressure. Some warm, wet substance pushed on and pulsed against their body as they floated in darkness. As they lay there, surrounded by the pitch-black void, a horrifying thought came into their mind. They couldn't breathe. Whatever surrounded them was also inside them, filling their lungs, mouth, and nose. They tried to scream, but they could not find the strength. Frantically, they tried to move. If they could just find something solid, something tangible in this dark, pulsating prison, but try as they might, their limbs seemed unresponsive. Faintly, from what seemed like it could have been just above their head or 1,000 miles away, they heard the hiss of escaping air, followed by a pop like the breaking of a long-closed seal. Immediately, the pressure lessened, and they felt something wrap around their body and begin to pull them upwards. They rose up and out, feeling the substance surrounding them slip past and begin to slide off their weak body as they were lifted into open air. Outside of wherever they had been, the raw air felt cold and sharp on their skin, like thousands of tiny needles pressed all over their whole body. Though they were no longer surrounded by the goo, it still filled their lungs, and as their naked body was placed gently on solid ground, they coughed, spitting up globs of something vile and warm. The world was still dark, but they could hear the beeping of machines and the murmuring of voices all around them. Laying on the cold ground, they tried unsuccessfully to open their eyes, straining against the crust seemingly gluing them shut. Panicking, they tried to move other parts of their body and found that they could, but not much, able to curl the fingers of their right hand in towards their palm. Relieved that they were not in fact paralyzed as they had feared, and mustering up what little strength they had, they attempted to roll onto their back, and in doing so, they discovered that though they could move, something was still very wrong. Something hard pressed into the skin of and protruded from their back, causing them to lay at an odd angle on the ground. They tried once more to open their eyes, this time finding enough strength to peer into the space around them, and almost immediately, they wished they hadn't. The light was blinding and bright, seeming to come from every direction. This quickly forced their eyes to shut tight once more, mind already aching from the brief exposure to their surroundings. Besides the light, something else invaded their mind, some repeating sound coming again and again. They focused on it, and after what could have been seconds or hours, began to understand what they were hearing. Someone was asking a question. Iteration 3, can you hear me?" They didn't understand at first, their mind turning slowly in their disoriented state. Eventually, they realized that they must be Iteration 3. Everything was so fuzzy, the last thing they could remember was... what was it again? They had to get somewhere, or no, that wasn't it. They had to get away from something, or no, they needed to... Before they could finish the thought, the voice came again, pounding into their skull. "Iteration 3, do you understand what I'm saying?" Intending to reply, they opened their mouth to speak, but all that came out was a groan mixed with more of that repugnant goop. They coughed and tried again, managing a weak "yes," before sputtering into another round of choking coughs. The voice, gruff and almost annoyed, came once more. "Good, now stand up and..." Another voice cut the first one off, softer and more gentle. Agon, you know as well as I do how disorienting the decanting process can be. Let's take them to get cleaned up, then into their rooms so they can rest before we try anything. There was a tense pause. Fine. I wish you'd give them some fucking sense before you woke them up. This was followed by the stomp of boots retreating out of the room. The softer voice spoke again. Dr. Blanc, would you please put our friend here to sleep so we can clean them up and get them back to their room? There was a shuffling, and moments later they felt something sharp penetrate their neck. They barely had time to register the pain of the injection before they faded back into unconsciousness. When they woke again, they were lying on their side. They were still weak, but not covered in goop, which they decided was a marked improvement. They opened their eyes. The light was still painfully bright, but it was bearable enough that they could look around. They appeared to be in a medium-sized concrete room. The walls were bare, and 4 round lights were set in a square pattern in the ceiling. They were lying on a bed, facing a door 15 feet or so away on the opposite wall. Glancing around them, they saw that the rest of the room was barely furnished. Besides the bed they were laying on, there were 2 chairs, a small table, and a small empty bookshelf. They were about to close their eyes again and attempt to go back to sleep, their body sore and aching, when they realized with a start that one of the chairs was occupied. A woman with short brown hair sat watching them closely. She wore a long black mesh shirt under which was a dark purple tee. Baggy cargo pants covered her legs, and on her hands, which were folded in her lap, were frayed fingerless gloves. There was also a halo of glowing red cubes encircling her head, which moved in a lazy circle as she studied them. They locked eyes, and her hazel pupils met their own. She smiled. Hey, kid. Awake at last, I see. You really are a heavy sleeper. They stared at the woman. You're probably confused. I guess let's start with this. You got a name yet? After a moment, they replied. Who are you? The woman smiled. I asked first. I don't know. The man, he called me Iteration 3? The woman chuckled. Agon, yeah, he's likely to call you that a lot. Don't mind him, he's just a grumpy old geezer. She paused. Let's see, you would be REAP-3R? Huh, I guess that actually works. Hey, kid, how does Reaper sound? They thought for a moment. Why? The woman sighed. Well, you are a part of the Reaper program, and it just so happens that being Iteration 3 lines up pretty well with their dumb acronyms. They stared at the woman. That's a really dumb way to name somebody. She laughed. Reaper it is then, though you'll always be kid to me. Reaper rolled the name over in their mind, feeling out the shape of it on their tongue. They decided they liked it, no matter how dumb its origins. They looked back towards the woman. And you? Who are you? She smiled at them, and with an air of false confidence announced, I am Iteration 2, but please, call me Claire. Reaper smiled and chuckled. Claire scoffed in mock horror. What's so funny? Nothing, it's just, I have no idea where I am. I have no idea what the hell is going on, but you have a normal name. Just Claire. Reaper tried to sit up, but found that they were somehow off balance. Something heavy weighed on their back. What the? Reaper looked towards Claire. What is on my back? Claire thought for a moment. You'd better come with me. She helped Reaper off the bed. On weak legs and leaning heavily on her shoulder, they hobbled out the door of their room and into the hallway beyond. Outside the room, the air was heavy and slightly dank. Without having to ask, Reaper knew somehow that they were deep underground. The corridor they stepped into was wider than Reaper had expected. Long, fluorescent lights set in the ceiling every 10 feet or so hummed in the otherwise silent passage. The walls were concrete and flat down the length of the hallway, the smooth gray only interrupted by a keypad on one wall some distance down the corridor. Glancing upwards and behind themselves, Reaper also noticed a small black sphere set into the ceiling above their door. The camera seemed to have a view of the entire corridor. The hallway continued for about 30 feet, ending in a T, further passages stretching to the right and left. Close to the end of the hallway, a strip of dull metal sat flush with the floor, the smallest of seams on either side. As they approached it, Reaper glanced towards Claire. "Is that?" Not looking at them, she responded. "A door. Yeah, just in case they need to put this place on lockdown. They feel safer knowing we're locked away." Reaper scoffed. "Safe? What the hell do they think we're gonna do?" Claire didn't respond for a while. It was only as they stepped over the metal threshold that she spoke. "Come on," she said. "We don't have much time before they'll come to get you for your orientation." Claire guided Reaper to the right as they continued through the halls. After a minute of walking, they came to another junction, hallways to the left and right of them. One was blocked by a metal wall, like the one Reaper had seen in the floor earlier, sealing it off completely. Directly across from it, a corridor stretched to the right, metal door lowered and flush with the ground. Claire turned down the open hallway, Reaper following behind her. Though they were more steady on their feet now, they still had a hand firmly gripping Claire's shoulder. At the end of this hallway was a normal metal door, much like the one in Reaper's room. As they advanced towards it, Reaper voiced a question. "Are we going to your room?" Claire smiled. "Come on. Like I said, we don't have much time." Claire pushed open the door at the end of the hall and stepped through, Reaper following close behind her. The room beyond was much like Reaper's, except that there were 2 bookcases instead of 1, and they were not empty. Far from it. On them sat a myriad of objects and trinkets of all shapes and sizes. There were also books, lots of books, some looking ancient, titles faded and spines peeling away to reveal the binding underneath. Across from the bookcases, there was a counter, and on top of the counter sat a coffee maker and some mugs. Next to that sat a full-length mirror, leaning against the wall, seemingly placed there fairly recently. Stepping in front of it, Reaper saw themselves for the first time. Their body was tall and lean, 6 foot, maybe 6'2". Long black hair fell down past their shoulders, some stray strands floating lazily in front of their face. Their eyes were large, irises a deep purple, and their skin seemed unnaturally smooth. They wore a gray shirt with yellow and black stripes along the collar and where the sleeve ended, and comfortable gray sweatpants. All of this they saw but for a brief moment, as immediately their eyes were drawn to the things behind them, emanating a soft aquamarine glow. 2 mechanical wings were folded, attached to their upper back, and as Reaper moved their shoulders, the wings moved as well, seemingly connected seamlessly to the rest of their body. Experimenting, Reaper focused on the point where the wings were connected to their body. It almost felt like there was a muscle there, and if they could just focus a bit, they could... Suddenly, they watched as, in the mirror, the wings began to unfold, 4 glowing winglets on each beginning to spread out behind them. Claire straightened, sitting upright on the bed where she had been lounging, and spoke, her voice urgent and concerned. "Whoa, hold up, kid. Not in here, not inside. Save that for training." This broke Reaper's concentration, and the wings folded back down. They turned to face Claire. "What am I?" Claire thought for a moment. "That," she started, but just then there came the clatter of footsteps outside the room. Claire and Reaper both turned at the sound. "That," Claire said again, "is probably the answer to your questions." 2 men in lab coats walked briskly down the hallway towards them. Behind them, a gaggle of soldiers in dark uniforms followed. One of the men was squarely built, shoulders tense, chest puffed out, a scraggly beard clinging to his face, and the hair on top of his head buzzed short. His name tag read Dr. Agan, and as he walked, his lab coat flared out, revealing to Reaper, who was sure that Claire saw it too, a holster strapped around his waist, firearm presumably stowed there. The other man was more slight, almost timid, his lab coat seeming to envelop his small frame. His bald head reflected the lights above, and a pair of small glasses were perched on his long nose, framing curious, slightly crazed eyes. His name tag read Dr. Faulkner. As they approached, Reaper glanced towards Claire. It was slight, just in the set of her jaw and the tension in her shoulders, but her demeanor had changed. She was trying not to show it, but these people made her nervous. The bald man, Dr. Faulkner, spoke first. "Ah, Claire and Iteration 3, I see you two have already been acquainted. Wonderful. Now, if you would be so kind as to..." Claire cut the man off. "It's actually Reaper." "Huh? Faulkner stammered. "Their name is Reaper. The man with the buzz cut, Dr. Agan, let out a condescending snort of laughter. Then, stepping forwards and past Faulkner, he entered the room, focused on Claire. Iteration 2, it's time for training. He turned to Reaper. And we need you to come with us. Reaper shot a worried look towards Claire, who winked and gestured towards Dr. Agan with her head, seeming to regain her earlier demeanor. You better go, she mused. Agan here gets grumpy if his toys don't play along. Dr. Agan stared daggers into Claire, who stared back, seemingly unfazed. The tension was broken when Reaper stood and began to make their way towards Agan and the door. Dr. Agan shot one last look towards Claire, before turning and marching out of the room, Reaper trailing behind him. As Reaper, Dr. Agan, and Dr. Faulkner walked down the hall, Claire rose from the bed where she had been sitting. As she stepped into the hallway, the soldiers, still outside, quickly moved to surround her. She sighed. You guys do know that you don't have to shuttle me everywhere like a child, right? I know where the training facility is. I can get there on my own. The soldiers around her stayed silent. Plus, she said, suddenly becoming almost a different person, her cool presence shifting into something much more menacing. You all do know that if I really wanted to hurt any of you, you would all be dead already. All the soldiers raised their guns. Claire noticed some of them seemed to be shaking. She laughed. Only joking. Please, you guys are too easy. The soldiers around her breathed audible sighs of relief and took a step back, giving her some space. And as she too walked down and out of the hallway, the soldiers could hear her muttering, Besides, what has it been, like 2 years? I mean, come on. The two men in lab coats escorted Reaper through twisting concrete halls, the hum of lights overhead omnipresent as they made their way through the underground maze. As they walked, Reaper felt their mind fill with questions. For the first time since waking up, they had a moment of silence, and as they proceeded through the labyrinth, Reaper found themselves alone with their thoughts. Obviously, they were in some kind of facility, but these scientists, did they create them? And if so, how do they know anything? Why were they so deep underground? What was the training Claire and Agan had mentioned? And a wave of fear ran through their body as a new question arose and drowned out all the others. If they were Iteration 3, and Claire was Iteration 2, then what happened to Iteration 1? They walked on, eventually, after passing many rooms, coming to a dead-end hallway, at the end of which was another heavy metal door. It looked to Reaper like an impenetrable wall of dull metallic gray, and again, Reaper wondered why there was so much security. Sure, maybe there was sensitive information, but did it warrant this? What were the scientists so afraid of? As Reaper mulled these questions over in their mind, Agan stepped forwards, punching a code into the keypad on the left wall. After a few quick keystrokes, Reaper heard the hiss of hydraulics as the door began to lower into the ground, eventually disappearing flush with the floor. The two men led Reaper into a large room with a circular table at its center and a large screen at the opposite end. They both pulled out chairs and sat down, Agan producing a small remote from his lab coat's front pocket. Reaper stayed standing, thinking it would be difficult to manage their wings in one of the high-backed chairs that ring the table. Agan put down the remote on that table and pulled out a cigarette and a lighter. He lit the cig and took a long draw. There was a pause as Agan blew out the smoke. Then he looked towards Reaper. You're probably confused. If you're quiet and will listen for a second, I'll try to explain things. This, he gestured around him, is Artorias. He picked up the remote in his free hand and pressed a button. A logo flashed on the screen behind him. But more specifically, the Reaper program. You are Iteration 3. I guess Iteration 2 thought it would be funny to call you a Reaper, seeing how we assign your designations. This means that you are the third of your kind. We, he nodded towards Dr. Faulkner, we made you to try to help save humanity. An image of people cheering popped up on the screen behind him. To do this, we're going to train you to fight, and you will work with us to carry out missions for the good of all the people left. The world has kind of gone to shit. The people were replaced by pictures of destroyed buildings and empty, overgrown streets. But we're trying to fix it. You probably noticed those fancy wings sticking out of your back. Follow me in a second, and I'll take you somewhere where you can learn to use those things. The logo from the start returned. Dr. Falconer piped up. After training, you will be free to explore the facility, or at least everything you have access to. This place will be your home, and I hope you can come to see us as your family. Any questions? Agan looked at Reaper, who, in fact, had a million questions. All the ones from earlier, as well as new ones, came flooding into their mind, though they voiced none of them. Good, Agan chuckled. Wouldn't have answered any of them anyway. Dr. Falconer shot him a dirty look. If you would be so kind as to follow us to the training facility, we can get started. With that, both doctors got up, and Reaper silently followed them out of the room. More hallways, and a few minutes later, they came upon another metal door. Dr. Falconer turned to Reaper. Dr. Agan and I are going to watch from the control room. When this door opens, step through, and you should hear us over the intercom. With that, he and Dr. Agan went through a smaller door in the corridor wall, disappearing as it closed behind them. A few moments later, just as they promised, the metal door in front of Reaper sank slowly into the floor. Seeing no other option, Reaper carefully stepped through. Once inside, the big metal door closed behind them. They found themselves in a small antechamber with metal doors to the front and back of the room. The wall to their right was a floor-to-ceiling mirror, probably one way, Reaper guessed. Falconer did say they would be watching. Seeming to read their thoughts, Reaper heard Falconer's voice over the intercom somewhere above.
Ah, good. I see you've made it inside. Just checking. You can hear me, yes?
Reaper answered, looking at the reflective wall. Yes, the response came.
Good. Excellent. To begin, place your hand in the simulation initiation apparatus. That box on the left wall.
Reaper turned. Behind them, there was a white box, a hole cut in the front that seemed just big enough for their hand. Reaper obliged and carefully slipped their hand inside. For a moment there was nothing, then there was a sharp pain as something pierced their flesh. They inhaled sharply.
Sorry, probably should have warned you about that, but you shouldn't have to do it more than once. We would have done it earlier, but it's easier when the eyes are fully developed and...
He trailed off. Whatever poked their hand retreated, and they pulled it out of the box and blinked. Images began to appear in their vision. Before their eyes, they watched as numbers appeared and disappeared rapidly. Text scrolled and then went away. Finally, after a few seconds, 3 words appeared floating in the air in front of them. System boot complete. Falconer's voice came through the speaker.
Can you see the display?
Reaper responded. Yeah, I can. As the words faded, they were replaced by a few lines of text in the top left corner of their vision. At the top was current targets, none. Below that, current weapon, none. Then, weapon status, NA, and finally, vitals, stable. Reaper had just finished reading these when they realized that Dr. Falconer was talking again.
Good. Now we are going to open the inner chamber doors. Once we do, your training can begin.
As he finished, the big metal door in front of them, like the others before it, began to descend into the floor. And as it revealed the chamber beyond, Reaper's response caught in their throat. The room in front of them was nothing like they had expected, and it took their breath away.